Hi, everyone. Welcome to another webinar from Change Lawyers. We are really excited to be hosting today's topic on trauma. I am particularly excited about this. My name is Carlos. I host our events here at Change Lawyers. And in the comments, feel free to drop in your name, your pronouns, and where you're joining us from. I know we have folks from across the state and probably across the country too. So feel free to share that with us. I'm just going to give folks like a minute more to join us. And I want to just point out that if you're watching on the Change Lawyers website, the links to register for parts 2 and parts 3 are right below the screen. And if you're watching on YouTube, the links are in the description box. Welcome, everyone. I see quite a few familiar names. It's nice to see so many of you joining us again. Jennifer, Daniel, welcome. Kelsey. All right, so keep on introducing yourselves in the comments. Most likely, these are going to be the folks who you're going to be sort of experiencing these events over the summer with for the next few months. Welcome, Ricardo, Dennis, Renee. So I'm going to turn it over to our instructor for today, Jocelyn Ortiz from One Justice. Jocelyn has prepared a presentation that I've had the privilege to look over, and I am really excited about it. This is a topic that I think affects so many of us, especially first-generation folks, and I will be taking down notes along with the rest of you. So thank you, Jocelyn, for joining us. And I'll let you introduce yourself and go ahead and kick it off. And I'll be back at the end.
Of course. Well, thank you so much, Carlos, and thank you to everybody for joining me today. I'm really excited to get started. So I'm Jocelyn Ortiz. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a program manager at One Justice. I graduated from Georgetown University with a BA. I also am certified through Yoga Teaching Alliance and Core Power as a 200-hour yoga instructor, teaching vinyasa and power flows. And I really care about vicarious trauma and burnout. I am a trauma survivor, and this is a particular interest to me. I am going to start this conversation by just saying that I am not a licensed mental health professional, but this is something that professionally and personally I'm very interested in. And so today we're going to be talking about vicarious trauma and burnout, and the cost of caring and being in a caring profession, how we can recognize the symptoms of vicarious trauma and burnout, and what the path towards healing and coping will look like. So we're going to start with the basic foundations of what burnout and vicarious trauma are, and also what they are not, and how we can assess how they may show up in our lives. From there, we'll delve into resources and strategies to reduce and cope with vicarious trauma and burnout, as well as give you an opportunity to reflect on steps that you'd like to take to promote your own wellness and establish a ritual of self-care in your personal and professional lives. You'll also be getting a downloadable PDF at some point to facilitate sort of your reflections, and you'll be able to sort of look back on this worksheet, hopefully after the session today, and take some of the things away with you and use it in your professional life. So before we get started on today's conversation, I felt that it was important to just do a quick mindfulness moment. So if you'd like, feel free to close your eyes or softly just have a soft gaze, maybe look up at the ceiling, and we're going to do a quick mindfulness minute. And thank you to everybody in the chat for putting in your location, your pronouns, who you are. It's so exciting to see so many people who are interested in this topic. So let's begin by taking a nice big inhale, long and slow, in through our nose. And let's do a long, slow exhale through our mouths, allowing the eyes to gently close or have a soft gaze. Take a few more deep breaths in at your own pace and out at your own pace. And just simply allowing your breath to find its own natural rhythm, knowing in this moment there's nothing you need to do. Even your body knows how to breathe all by itself. allowing yourself to rest in the rhythm of your own breathing, feeling into the rhythm of your breath, resting in this rhythm. As you're ready, taking a moment to scan through your body, to notice how your body may be holding the day so far, noticing any points of tightness, of tension, of clenching. The usual culprits are the brow, the jaw, maybe it's your shoulders, maybe your chest, maybe your belly. Just become curious about the tension that may be there. No need to judge or get lost in a story about the tension. Just simply label it and be with it. Perhaps by bringing awareness to the tight areas of the body, you notice that they may soften or not. Simply just be curious, notice, observe. And as you are ready, take the deepest breath you've taken all day, in through your nose and out through your mouth. Exhale. We can refocus back to our screens now. I always like to begin sessions like this with a mindfulness moment. I find that it helps sort of center us as we're about to delve into this material. And as we get started today, I just wanted to say a reminder about make sure that you're taking care of yourselves. We'll be discussing vicarious trauma in the workplace and burnout. So you may connect with the content today. And yes, please feel free to drop in any questions you may have. So just take a minute if you need to assess where you're at and step away for a second if that's important. I invite you to be open to the content and to the questions that may be put in the chat later. I invite you to stay curious. And this is obviously a safe place for sharing. And I ask that participants be mindful of sharing and really hearing what others have to say in their lived experiences and avoiding any distractions or interruptions for the next hour that we get to share together. This is a really safe place, a place where we can really connect to healing and connect to our experiences. And so I know we have a lot at our fingertips right now, our emails, Slack, Google Chat, but I just ask it to stay present and we'll have plenty of time to refresh our emails and double task later. I do want to get started with a quick little question to gauge where people are. So in the chat, if you wouldn't mind just responding to how, when I say the words burnout or vicarious trauma, what do those words bring up for you? What is your concept of these terms? How do you connect to them currently? Do you have a strong reaction to these words? So if you do, feel free to just drop a one word in the chat or two words in the chat. Mental exhaustion, I definitely relate to that. Draining, exhaustion again, fatigue and stress for sure. Heartache, it's real, yes. You're stressed out, you're mentally tired, you're overwhelmed. Migraines, I get really bad migraines too. Being overstimulated. Yes, loss of joy of doing things, disassociating. Emotionally, physically, mentally depleted. You guys are, yes, overworked, unable to function, drained and tired. You guys are definitely zoning in on a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about during this presentation. So it's good to know that you have a strong concept of this. Numb, feeling sad, exhausted, loss of joy, your body just feeling like it's shutting down. Yeah, so thank you so much for sharing and being vulnerable. I know that it's hard to talk about these things, but as you can see in the chat, there's a lot of people that feel the same way. And then I have another question. So how many times per week are you practicing self-care? If you would put that in the chat as well, that would be helpful. It's helpful to gauge how much people are practicing self-care right now. Are you being active and conscious about it? How often do you do something nice for yourself to de-stress or balance after or during work? One to two times a week, 2 times a week, 2 times a week. Okay, so I'm seeing a theme between 1 to 2 times a week. I'd say that's fairly average, I think, for 3 to 4 times a week. Oh, that's amazing. Daily, Still trying to define what that means for me every day. 0. Yes, and it's really common to struggle with self-care and with feeling guilty for taking care of yourself. And yes, something small every day is great. I've been working in nonprofits since I was 18. And so for all of my professional life, I've been working in nonprofits and social justice. And it's been a challenge to develop a weekly self-care routine that I've practiced. So I think it's very common to forget about it or to feel guilty about doing it, but doing something smaller daily will definitely help. And that's what we're here today for. So thank you for sharing. Now we're going to get into some definitions quickly. I think this is important just to establish and sort of get on the same page. So thank you for participating in that. And now I want to delve into the definitions and see how burnout and vicarious trauma, often we conflate these ideas, but they're pretty different. So burnout is something that develops gradually due to an accumulation of stress and an erosion of idealism. And it really comes from chronic and unmanaged stress in the workplace. So anybody can develop burnout from any profession. It's an accumulation of stress, an increase in emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion, like a lot of you have stated in your comments, that's caused by unmanaged and unmitigated stress in the workplace. When there are not proper checks and balances at work to ensure people are supported or that they have doable workloads and feel comfortable setting boundaries at workplaces, you get burnout. And when people experience burnout, they might also experience cynicism, an erosion of purpose, an erosion of impact in their communities, and that influences their ability to work and enjoy the work that they're doing. Vicarious trauma is different, though. So vicarious trauma is often present in helping professions like social work, therapeutic environments, mental health spaces, first responders, and also the legal profession. So helping professionals like yourselves or people who are working with traumatized populations and clients, and you develop your own trauma symptoms based on working and hearing the lived experiences of those that you are tasked with providing services for. This is often referred to as compassion fatigue or secondary trauma or secondary stress reaction. And in the legal sphere, it's something that we are becoming more aware of and actively attempting to bring more awareness to due to the ways in which vicarious trauma can impact legal providers like yourselves. There is an overlap of symptomology between burnout and vicarious trauma, and an individual can have both as well. So they're not mutually exclusive either. And the solution to coping and healing from vicarious trauma and burnout lies in being able to assess your symptomology, assess your needs, seek resources and help, and create deeper understanding on how to develop resilience so that you can continue to do the important work that you do without losing your empathy, without losing meaning in your work, and with being able to set boundaries to meet your own needs. So now that we've gotten through those definitions, we're going to do 2 more that I think are also really important because I think we conflate these a lot as well. So we're going to look at wellness and self-care. It's important to understand the difference so that you can incorporate them into your burnout and trauma resilience plan, which we'll get into. Wellness is a state of being. It's a holistic integration of our physical, mental, and spiritual well-being that sustain us and give us purpose in life. So we want to fuel and rest our bodies. We want to engage and challenge our minds. And we want to nurture our human spirits. It's the innate connection to being human, the innate connection to each other and nature. The alignment and balance of these 3 facets is core to the human experience of fulfillment and feeling good, right? Wellness is personal. It's different for us all. It might incorporate daily movement or a spiritual or religious practice, or it might help us connect with nature or a sense of community. And so wellness is really a holistic state of being. It's something that we want to achieve, and it's also very innate in our human drive to seek connection. Self-care is a little bit different. Self-care is really popularized now. I think capitalism has really capitalized on the idea of self-care, but self-care is a practice that we can partake in, any practice we can partake in, to look at ourselves and meet our short-term and our long-term needs. You take time out of your life to do things that you know will make you feel nice, things that will soothe you, things that will improve your mental and physical health when you feel like there may be a strain. Self-care can look like a lot of things for a lot of people. It's widely about using things and practices available to you to foster self-love. And we can use self-care to maintain our wellness or well-being and to bring our well-being back into balance after it's been thrown off. So I think it's important to conceptualize both of those as well. And now we're going to get into some data. I'm sure a lot of you are very cognizant of data around legal aid and helping professionals like yourselves. But when it comes to vicarious trauma and trauma and symptomology in the workplace, I've selected a couple of data points that might be surprising or helpful. So vicarious trauma rates amongst U.S. attorneys are 5 times higher than any other helping profession, according to Pace Law Review and a study that they did. Attorneys, mental health providers, and social workers found that in that study, they found that lawyers experience the most frequent and severe symptoms of secondary trauma and burnout. And also, they found that attorneys demonstrate significantly higher levels of symptomology of PTSD, depression, secondary traumatic stress disorder, and general functional impairment compared with their administrative support staff. And this is usually because attorneys have higher caseloads, they work longer hours, and they have more direct contact with traumatized clients. So you're at a significantly higher risk of developing trauma symptoms. Working in the legal aid sector, I see a push for more understanding and conversation around vicarious trauma. Obviously, what Change Lawyers is doing today is part of that larger conversation and push to talk about vicarious trauma and burnout in the field. And there are definitely resources and systems in place that have begun to support attorneys through vicarious trauma and burnout and dealing with these symptoms and having support mechanisms. However, there are certain factors that are always going to be challenging about working in this field, including high client caseloads, having direct contact with systems and survivors, and just being chronically underfunded in the nonprofit and legal aid sphere. So being cognizant of these challenges is important. It means that it's no personal fault of our own for developing burnout or vicarious trauma symptoms, that it's really a larger symptom of our humanity and empathy that we develop vicarious trauma or burnout. We have limits as humans, and it's our responsibility to care and nurture for ourselves so that we can help those that need our help and that we want to help. So on to sources of traumatic exposure. I wanted to briefly include a list of, and I think it's important to also acknowledge the sources of traumatic exposure, particularly in the legal aid workplace. So things like court reports, client interviews, police reports, social services reports, evidence, witness accounts, and testimony are all places where you might be exposed to some type of traumatic narrative or events that your clients may have faced or gone through. And while there are many other sources of exposure in your particular field or your caseload, it's important to be aware of what may be the source of secondary trauma exposure so that you can take steps to develop plans post-client interviews or post-reading court reports or post-testimony so that you can develop secondary trauma resilience and establish a self-care plan preemptively. And then we're going to go to risk factors. There are a variety of risk factors that can put certain practitioners at greater risks of developing burnout or secondary trauma responses over others. And I'm sure some people might be familiar with this. So practitioners who have the following need to exercise more awareness of their symptomology or just remain diligent about self-assessing how they feel, particularly after intense experiences and in conjunction with the support of others who may have similar experiences. So those with trauma histories themselves can experience events or have a client intake that maybe trigger a trauma response that they personally may have felt. It could be anything from childhood, something in college, something in law school. So it may trigger your own trauma history by hearing the vicarious trauma of others. Things like isolation and having an inadequate support system make you more at risk for severe secondary trauma response symptoms or burnout. Because really burnout and trauma symptoms exacerbate when you don't have anybody to talk to, when you are living in isolation, when there aren't support systems in place to check in on you. pre-existing psychological disorders also put you at risk. A lack of quality supervision can put you at risk. High percentage of trauma survivors in your caseloads, as well as inadequate training for the roles that you're performing. So it's important to assess whether any of these factors apply to you so that you can set up plans and support systems to maintain a baseline of self-care and boundaries at work as well. So compounding your trauma or your trauma responses may make you feel like you're burning out at an unsustainable rate, which we don't want. And it's really important to be aware of that as well. And now we're going to get into some symptoms. This is a pretty long list, and it's definitely by no means a definitive list of symptomology. It's comprehensive in terms of how wide-ranging vicarious trauma can pop up in your life and the areas of life that it affects. You'll see anything from sleep interruption to insomnia to digestive problems, a development of cynical beliefs, substance misuse, feeling agitated, or irritable more often. You might be eating too much or eating too little. There's things such as morbid preoccupation, a disruption in your belief system, fatigue, negative coping, not having boundaries, having panic symptoms, feeling numb, and then also feeling like you might be having oversized reactions to things at the same time. Self-doubt and fear, having conflict with those around you, going deeper into isolation and withdrawal. So in a little bit, I'm going to ask you what signs of vicarious trauma you may have experienced in the past or may believe may be a concern given actions or symptoms you've had in law school or in your personal life that might align with some of these. And then we're going to go to common signs of burnout. So same thing here for burnout and the signs and symptoms. You might notice that thematically, these are very similar to vicarious trauma, yet there are some overt differences. Signs of burnout often are compounded by more structural inefficiencies in the legal aid or nonprofit space. There may not be enough staff or mechanisms in place to quickly alleviate the causes of your burnout in the workplace, which makes treating burnout harder on a systemic level, which I'm sure a lot of you may understand and have experienced. Feeling burnout may lead to you feeling apathetic about your work. Maybe you forget the work that needs to be done, or you're disorganized at work, misplacing files. Maybe you have a cluttered desktop that you just don't want to tackle. You procrastinate on tasks, maybe show up late to meetings. Maybe not being able to focus for long periods of time, whether that's at meetings or when you're doing simple tasks. I've noticed that when I'm really burnt out, I have a really hard time doing worksheets, like Excel worksheets. And that's when I know that I really need to reassess why I feel that way and how I can help myself to not feel that way. You may feel detached from your personal mission or more reactive to your coworkers. People report a decrease in their belief in their own work ethic and in the work ethic of those around them. And this may impact your relationships at work and your ability to work with your coworkers. And it can also impact your relationships at home. When you have a bad day at work, that can transition into a bad day in the evening at home with your kids or with your family, with your partner. So there are physical symptoms to burnout too, like changes in sleep. Maybe you develop insomnia or you're waking up a lot at night. Maybe you feel forgetful or foggy, and you might notice a general decrease in energy as well. However, these aren't trauma symptoms like vicarious trauma, although there is a significant amount of overlap. And as we get into strategies for coping and healing, you'll notice that the strategies are very similar for both. And so on to something I know, so we're not going to do small breakout rooms. Martina dropped into the chat. You'll see a link at the very top for a compassion worksheet. If you copy and paste that link into your browser, you'll get a fillable PDF, which you can fill out. I believe also you can make a copy and turn it into a Word document if that's easier for you. Maybe you just want to write on the side. You have a piece of paper by your desk and you want to respond that way. I'm going to give everybody about 3 minutes to answer the first question on that sheet, which is about the signs of burnout and vicarious trauma. So let's see. Sorry, 1 second. So while you click on that and get adjusted to getting there, the first question says, when I begin to feel the symptoms of vicarious trauma, I experience the following. You can also replace vicarious trauma with burnout if you feel that your experience with burnout aligns more than vicarious trauma. How does that feel in your body? How might your thoughts or perceptions change when you experience vicarious trauma or burnout? What emotions or behaviors might you engage in? Reflect on this for a moment, jot some thoughts down. Feel free to share in the chat if you feel comfortable enough with sharing your experience. I feel like that's always helpful. And I'll give people until the 30-minute mark. So in 3 minutes at 12:30 or whatever local time it is for you, um, we'll just save this all for reflection, and feel free to type in the chat anything that comes up for you. I know for me, when I feel like I'm experiencing high levels of burnout, my stomach hurts. I get migraines frequently. I have a harder time falling asleep. So things like that that you notice, maybe emotionally, you notice that you are having a harder time connecting with people. Um, Maybe perception wise, you notice that you're just less confident in your competence or the competence of those around you. Maybe you become a little bit more hyper vigilant. So I'll be quiet for the next 2 minutes while you guys think and share. Great. Um, well, thank you for taking time to look at those questions on the compassion resilience worksheet and answer them. Does anybody want to share anything in the chat? Obviously, no pressure, but I do want to make sure that if anybody wants to share, they can. Okay. So let's get into coping and healing strategies. And this is something we're going to talk about for a while. So there's lots of ways to reflect and be able to get to a place where you understand what works for you and what doesn't. When I first started in my healing journey and really had to sit down and think about the things that I was doing that weren't helping me and the things that were that I wasn't doing enough, I realized that there was a lot to change in my conception of what self-care and healing meant. I thought that if I bought enough face masks and enough expensive Sephora creams, that somehow that would alleviate my stress and the things that were really compounding my stress at work. I thought if I got, a massage or I got a pedicure, that those things would help. And it really turns out that what really helps is connecting to our base human instinct to breathe, to meditate, to be in nature, to connect with each other, to be by yourself and let your thoughts flow. Those are the things that actually regenerate you. And there's a lot of things online now about how capitalism has skewed our view of self-care and wellness. And I think really bringing it back to the basics is what's important when we're figuring out how to cope and heal. So I've listed some clinically and research-backed strategies that can decrease or mitigate trauma symptoms and can bring you back to what I like to call equilibrium. These help reset your nervous system, especially your parasympathetic nervous system, which calms you and takes your sympathetic nervous system out of dysregulation and into a rest and digest state. So when I talk about your parasympathetic nervous system, it's really about being able to calm yourself. You have your vagus nerve, which is a very large center right here that is very important in healing and soothing strategies. And when you're dysregulated, when your sympathetic nervous system is dysregulated, it doesn't allow for your body to function properly. It doesn't allow for you to access your mental strategies very well because your brain is so clogged by my body hurts, my body is dysregulated. And that's often why people who have digestive problems feel as though they're not digesting well when they're stressed out. And it's because your body is basically in a freeze state and is operating solely to try and get you through a stressful event. So these practices can also give you a healthy dopamine reset and release. Often we get a lot of dopamine releases from our phones and from social media. So shifting your brain to accept dopamine from things that are actually natural is good. Fostering community and connection is paramount when healing vicarious trauma and burnout, because the biggest parts of vicarious trauma and burnout that affect us as humans is being separate and isolated. So to be around people and to connect engenders a sense of resilience and also charges up our depleted empathy, because vicarious trauma is often also called secondary stress reaction and is also very much tied to a depleted sense of empathy. And so ensuring that we have compassion and that we're building compassionate and empathetic resilience is part of our coping and healing as well. You'll notice breath work, which really has to do with regulating your breath. And you focus so much on your breath that you're allowed basically to sort of zone out of your mind. Meditation is a really good practice. It allows you to focus on the present and not on your long to-do list of things. I often found that meditation was the hardest thing for me when it came to healing and coping strategies because my brain is just going 1,000 miles a minute and I love to always be thinking about the next thing. So meditation forced me to slow down and to examine how I could not be so hard on myself if my mind drifted away, but always how to bring it back to center. As I said, peer support is a really big mechanism in being able to sustain a career in legal aid and be resilient to vicarious trauma. Counseling is a very big part, and there's lots of resources for lawyers and attorneys that involve counseling in group settings and individual settings. Somatic practices are really important. If you Google or put into YouTube, a somatic body release or a somatic body scan, things like that help you feel in your body, which is really important. Limiting social media and TV intake is really important. We often experience vicarious and secondary trauma through social media, through seeing war zones and through seeing things on the news that people 200, 300 years ago would have never seen on a phone screen. Your body can't really distinguish what's happening to you versus what you're seeing, which is why horror movies are so scary. There's a lot of psychology and research that goes into how our brains view things that are through a screen, but still experience them as really happening. And so limiting the amount of secondary and vicarious trauma you intake through TV and social media is also really important when you have a profession that is already giving you vicarious trauma or burnout. Boundary setting is a coping and healing strategy. And boundary setting, I think, is a scary thing to say to a lot of legal aid attorneys and nonprofit professionals because we came into this profession to be helpers. And so setting boundaries is hard because we want to help and we want to be available. But it's also part of creating sustainability at work to set boundaries and making sure that you're not depleting yourself, because when you're depleting yourself, you're not only hurting yourself, but you're hurting the people that you're trying to serve. setting a self-care routine, which we'll get into in a little bit. Having an established self-care routine that's simple and that's easy to follow is what's paramount to anything else. If you have a 30-step self-care routine that takes you 3 hours a day, that's not going to be helpful for you because you're not going to be able to do that every day. It's not sustainable. Creating a 5-minute self-care routine in the morning, I'm going to make my tea, I'm going to sit with my tea and my lemon water, and I'm not going to look at my phone right away. That's a self-care routine that you can follow. That's pretty easy. Journaling, gratitude journaling, free thought journaling. These are all really great ways to get your thoughts down on paper, and it's very cathartic. Yoga, I am a licensed yoga instructor, and I couldn't even touch my toes when I first started yoga about 5 or 6 years ago. And the yoga spaces that I went to were predominantly white and affluent, and it wasn't very inviting for me, and I really struggled with it until I started developing an at-home yoga practice. Linked in the resources that Martina has shared and that we'll share again at the end, there's a really couple of great yogis who I follow, Yoga with Adrienne and Yoga with Nico, who are both women of color who practice yoga and have free and accessible yoga through YouTube. And what I really loved about it is that it was free. So you're not paying $30 to $40 for a class in a studio that may or may not be welcoming. You can do it on your bed, on your couch, on the floor in your living room with your kids and your dog. They have anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour of yoga practices, and you can choose based off of what is accessible to you, if it's chair yoga, desk yoga. And I find that it's really easy to kickstart a practice where you do yoga for 10 minutes in the morning and just stretch on the floor on your carpet. You don't need a yoga mat. You don't need any of the fancy yoga leggings. I do it in my pajamas a lot of the time. And I find that that's an easy way to connect with your body, with your breath, with meditation. Yoga is sort of an all-encompassing somatic experience. And so that's why I really focus on that. Community service is also really important to coping and healing. And I think this is one that often goes overlooked. Of course, Nicolette, yes, we'll share everything at the end. Community service is really important in the sense that you lose a lot of your connection to your humanity when you experience really harsh vicarious trauma symptoms and burnout symptoms. You go from feeling as though you're making an impact into the world to thinking, oh, I'm stressed out, I'm tired, I'm irritable, I don't know if I'm making an impact. These systems are just so ingrained with this high level of trauma. And so you really lose a little bit of what drew you to the job. Doing community service, volunteering at senior centers, at child care centers, teaching kids how to read, picking up trash at your local parks or at the beach. I have a colleague who volunteers at a foster center for cats and dogs, and finding something where there's just this uninhibited, like connection to nature, to humans, or to animals, that is really healing in itself. And so reconnecting to your purpose through community service is a really important part of letting go of some elements of cynicism. EMDR, which is a form of rapid eye movement therapy that is becoming more popular, is clinically backed by lots of studies that show that EMDR helps reduce trauma symptoms and secondary trauma symptoms. So it's worth looking into if you have it covered by your insurance and are interested in it and have done some research on it. And also creative activities. A large part in being a trauma survivor for me is reconnecting to my inner child. And I feel like there's a lot of talk about your inner child nowadays and what that means. And for me, connecting to my inner child is about being creative. I loved writing when I was a kid. I loved riding horses when I was a kid. I loved making up stories and reading and doing finger painting and painting with pastels. So that's what I started doing as an adult when I started my trauma intensive therapy. And when I was really coming to terms with things that had affected me in childhood, it was really helpful to draw and to color and to get on a horse for the first time since I was 12 years old. And so finding the things that connect you to what you liked as a kid is really important. And it's a good way to express yourself too. You don't have to be good at it. And that's something that I know a lot of attorneys really struggle with is you want to be really good at something that you're doing and you want it to feel very purposeful. But sometimes just making a bad drawing or just, putting something on a painting, it's not about it being beautiful. It's about expressing yourself and being able to do something that's so freely. So I highly recommend that as well. Some other stuff that you can do at work that I find is really helpful, that isn't listed here. Physically or mentally changing your environments, right? So maybe doing a staycation. Reading fiction is really helpful. I used to read a lot of books that were very intense about my job. I read a lot about trauma, obviously. And so I started reading Harry Potter again, and I started reading science fiction again, and reading things that mentally change your environment and maybe aren't based in reality is fun. Going to different locations for work. I love that everybody's putting in the chat like all these really great things that you've experienced. So thank you so much, and feel free to keep it going. So physically or changing your environment can really help with burnout as well. Seeking connection with your community and peers, as I've said, is really big. There's a lot of networks of attorneys who come together and talk about burnout and vicarious trauma in the workplace. So starting that at your organization, asking HR or those in the DEI development zone to look into if people are interested in creating connection or working groups on this is really important. It's also important to build in relaxation and decompression times into your workday, or even into your mornings or evenings after work. So building in time during lunch, making sure to take your lunch is really important. Going for walks during lunch before or after work is really important. That's why I love having my dog, is that he forces me to get up in the middle of the workday and go outside and feel the sun on my face. Otherwise, I don't know if I would do that. It's also important to create unplug hours or days. I try and do this at least for 1 hour a day, and then I try and do it again on Sundays, so I'm not getting the Sunday scaries by looking at my email. So putting your phone and your emails on Do Not Disturb. I've learned that there's a lot of really cool apps out there that help you mitigate your social media and notifications on your phones. One that I really like is called Screen Zen. And I believe it's in the iPhone store and the Android store. It should be a little purple icon, and it helps you basically time yourself for how much time you're spending on social media. It'll block certain websites. So if Reddit is a problem for you, I have Reddit blocked on my phone and my browser because it was causing me too much anxiety looking at all the stuff that Reddit users put on there. I have my email notifications turned off on the weekend, so there's a lot of things that you can do to create unplugged parts of your day. And then also practicing gratitude journaling, which I know I referenced when we were talking about journaling as a coping and healing strategy. There's this really great journal called the 5-Minute Daily Journal that I believe you can get online or print out free printable versions of it, where you just write 5 things every day that you're grateful for and what you're looking forward to, and maybe a couple of promises that you can make to yourself. So doing things like that to create mindfulness in your everyday life is really important. So yeah, and I see so many great things in the chat about baking and a standing desk and a walking pad and having a dance party with music and reconnecting to sports. And there's so many great ways that you can cope and heal and find a little bit of joy and presence in your workday and outside of work. And so now we're going to return back to the worksheet that Martina put in the chat. Questions 2 through 4. I find that this worksheet has been really helpful, and I've used it in the past when trying to help people with what works for them. So for questions 2 through 4, you'll see we're not going to do a small group again. We'll just have you reflect, and if you feel like anything is calling for you to put in the chat, please feel free to put in the chat. How do you regenerate your energy and your compassion Who is in your support system that you know that you can depend on? How do you maintain positive functioning and coping in your life? So answer these questions. Save the last question, question number 5, for the end, which we're going to close out pretty soon. And we're going to have time for questions and answers at the end of the session. But I just want to give people, let's give people until 12:51 or 51 at whatever time it is near you, to just reflect and answer on these questions. And feel free to put in the chat at any point if something is calling to you. Great. Well, I hope that was helpful to reflect on, and thank you to the people in the chat for putting in what works for you and what you found has been helpful to reframe and reflect on. And personally, as someone with a rescue dog who he's changed my entire life, I can agree with Maricela that it enriches your life so much. And I found like a new sense of purpose with my dog. And with that, I want to close out. So we're at the end of our session. We'll have a little bit of time for questions and answers if people want to stick around and put some questions in the chat. It's been such an honor to speak with you all today. You are all doing such amazing work, and thank you for participating. It looks like so many of you are really taking the time and steps necessary to take care of yourselves, and I think that's so important and so critical to this sector that you all take care of yourselves so you can take care of other people. So I just want to answer one more question on the worksheet, and it's the last question. After this session, I will. So what is one promise you can make to yourself after this session? After this session, what will you continue to do the work on that we've started here today? It can be something small, like promising to take a 10-minute walk outside after work to unplug, or 5 minutes of breath work before bed to turn the brain off. Maybe it's just trying a free yoga video for the first time, or writing 3 things you're grateful for every morning for a week and seeing how you feel. Maybe it's texting a friend or a family member. Maybe it's getting coffee with a coworker and just talking about, hey, I'm a little bit stressed out right now. Anything that will help center you and regenerate you. While you think of that, Martina's put in the chat a list of resources. It's a Google Drive folder, and thank you for highlighting it. And feel free to put your resolutions for after the session I will in the chat as well. I think it's helpful to see this, and I've seen, promising to be more gentle with yourself, incorporating 30 minutes of self-care into your daily routine. These are all so beautiful. So for this resource folder, I've compiled quite a list of different things. There's links to guided meditations, stress management yoga videos, there's breathwork guides and breathwork scripts. There's a progressive muscle relaxation script that I particularly like that is in there as well as a resource. There's gratitude journaling prompts in there from the Macari Institute, which are what the compassion resilience worksheet that we worked on is based off of. There's academic sources for all of the information in this presentation today. I believe there's about 20 academic sources if you'd like to look over those and learn more about vicarious trauma. We only had an hour today, so this is really just a primer for everything, and we couldn't get much deeper than I would have liked, but I think that this is such a great place to start, especially on your self-care and healing journey. I hope that these resources help you as you continue to discover what works for you and what's accessible to you, and provide some free and very basic starting points to sustain you over time. My contact information is right here. If you'd like to reach out, give feedback about today's session, or are considering a similar training for your organization. And I'll stick around and check in with you if you'd like to chat and put something in the comments. Otherwise, thank you so much for taking the time to care for yourselves today. And I believe we can send the slides, and the slides are also in that folder that Martina and Carlos have shared. So thank you so much. And Carlos, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Yes, so slides, resources. If you registered, you'll be receiving an email from me in like an hour or two with links. And then you can also come, if you're watching on the Change Lawyers website, you can just come back here in like an hour and the website will be updated with all the links. We have 5 minutes, so if anyone has any questions for Jocelyn, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and then we can highlight them and try to answer them. I just absolutely love what you were saying, Jocelyn, so thank you. I was writing things down in my journal, and by the end of it, I felt just I had like almost like a sense of pride because I realized that I was doing a lot of it already. and I just didn't give myself credit for that type of self-care work, right? So like also have a rescue, and that's been incredible for my mental health. She forces me to like take breaks, which honestly, like it's crazy how bad we can be at like pulling away from things. So yeah, I think that I just realized like how much I was doing already.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And it's so important to be gentle with yourself and to recognize that you are taking care of yourself. Because I think often we're like, oh, we're not doing enough. And oftentimes we are because our innate human instinct is to take care of ourselves. So, yeah, I'm so glad that resonated. Thank you to everybody for joining as well.
And last call for any questions. We'll try to answer them in the last few minutes that we have here. So we have one from Daniela, and I'll highlight it so you can tackle it, Jocelyn.
Yeah, how can we reach out to a friend who we think may be burnt out without overstepping? Um, Honestly, I think just asking, like, how are you feeling? How's work been for you? A lot of people, I think that it might be like offensive or odd to ask, but often you're the first person to ask. And so I think just like coming from it from a point of kindness and understanding and being like, this is something that I'm also struggling with and that I've had a hard time talking about with other people, I think is really important too. In my last career, we were working with lots of human rights violations and people who have survived human rights violations. And so the attorneys there were very burnt out and a lot of them didn't really talk to each other because their caseloads were so heavy that they they were often on their own. It was COVID, it was crazy, but just being able to say like, hey, this is something I'm not like doing super well with right now. I just want to check in and see how you're doing and what strategies you're using too, and maybe just sharing that I think is helpful. Hopefully that was helpful. Thank you, Daniela, for asking that. That is so important to connect with others.
That's a great question and answer and feedback. Like it's not the norm in the legal profession to talk about this stuff. So I think that like everyone who watched this today and who experienced this past hour can now talk about it from a personal perspective. Like this is what I do. This is what's helped me, and honestly, just just talking about that about yourself and like how it's helped you, and maybe someone will hear you in the office, and that's all it took, right? Just like knowing that someone else was doing it, it kind of destigmatizes it and it creates a new norm among lawyers to take care of themselves and to think about like the trauma that they've accumulated.
Definitely, definitely. And being like, "Oh, hey, I'm gonna go do a 10-minute walk for lunch. Do you wanna come?" Or like,
Yep.
"Let's start the call with a couple of deep breaths." Like, I think even that is like something that most people wouldn't be upset about. So
All right, Jocelyn, I'll let you go, but thank you so much for
of
this. It was
course.
wonderful. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Like I said, if you registered for today, you'll receive an email from me. Check right below you. There are links to two upcoming webinars, sort of related to this. They sort of build on each other. So you can register for those and you'll receive reminders when they're coming up. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can find those registration links in the description box. And check back in a few hours. By the end of the day, the website will be updated with all of the links. So thank you all for joining us, and I'll see you all again July 9th.